Slava Ukraini, Russia is losing the war. Today I'll tell you why, and we'll talk about their weaknesses. Welcome to a new format of explanatory videos called No Filters. I'm Darina Tacheko. Contrary to what Russian propaganda says, Ukraine is still winning this war. Russia's miserable advance and the situation in Pokrovsk. How Russia is desperately trying to break the West. But before we start, subscribe to our channel UATV Español and join the conversation in the comments below the video. Let's see what it's all about together. No filters, no distortions. Let's go over the facts step by step. When Russia annexed Crimea and occupied part of the Donbas region in the year 2014, Ukraine seemed almost completely defenseless. At that time, many thought the country didn't stand a chance against the Russian army. 8 years later, in February 2022, when Putin launched the full-scale invasion, even Russia's own leadership and much of the world expected Kyiv to fall within days and the Ukrainian army to be completely destroyed. Some Western allies had so little faith in Ukraine's chances that they even offered to evacuate President Volodymyr Zelensky and to help him form a new government in exile abroad. You remember Zelensky's famous source? "I need ammunition, not a ride." Well, the Ukrainian troops, who were clearly outgunned and facing overwhelming odds, surprised the entire world, repelled the attack on Kyiv, defended the capital city house by house, and ultimately forced the Russian forces to retreat. They had their tails between their legs. The Ukrainian journalist, publicist, and writer Vitaly Portnikov points out that the Russian army suffered a significant and humiliating defeat that struck directly at its imperial ambitions. He explains that the image of the world's strongest and most powerful army was completely destroyed near Kyiv, quote, "was buried forever in the forests near Chernobyl, never to be resurrected."
The Russian army is defeated at the most critical moment. Similarly, in restoring the imperial space, building an imperial space is very important. The impotence of the Russian army. Until February 2022, everyone believed that if the Russian army wanted to enter any former Soviet republic, it would occupy that country within 24 or 48 hours, change the government, and dictate the rules of life to its people. And now the Russian army enters Ukrainian territory and nothing happens. Russian troops are being destroyed near Gostomel. Russian troops are literally being wiped out at the approaches to Kyiv and Chernihiv. The Russian army is being defeated at the most critical moment for itself in the restoration of the imperial space. Vitaly Portnikov, Ukrainian journalist, publicist, and writer.
Whatever Russia does next, regardless of which cities it ultimately captures in the Donbas, its political and military reputation is now completely tarnished. It has suffered a fiasco. At the end of the summer of 2022, Ukraine launched lightning counteroffensives. It liberated almost the entire Kharkiv region and then the city on the right bank of the Dnipro River and Kherson. In just a few months, it regained more territory than Russia had conquered in half a year. Since then, the front line has moved very little. There are indeed local advances and setbacks, but the Russians try to sell the idea that they're advancing nonstop. The reality is different. Since the spring of 2022, Russia has not conquered any major strategic objective. Not Kyiv, not Kharkiv, not Kherson, not Odessa. None, not a single major city they set out to take. And here comes the fact that destroys the Russian narrative. In August 2025, Russia controls less Ukrainian territory than it did in August 2022. Yes, you heard that right. After 3.5 years of full-scale war, after losing hundreds of thousands of soldiers killed and wounded, after burning through thousands of tanks, armored vehicles, and planes, Russia occupies less land than at the beginning. That is the price of their so-called cowardly special military operation. The Israeli historian Yuval Noah Harari explained it perfectly in an article in the Financial Times titled, "Why Ukraine is Winning the War." For Ukraine, it makes complete military sense to make tactical withdrawals, temporarily give up ground, and preserve the lives of their soldiers. They force the Russians to wear themselves out in absurdly costly frontal assaults that barely yield any gains. The truth is that Ukraine managed to stop Russia, Harari emphasized. And not just on land, at sea, thanks to the creative use of naval drones and anti-ship missiles, Ukraine has practically neutralized the entire Black Sea fleet, the entire Russian fleet. Today, the remaining Russian ships hide in distant ports, far from Crimea, because they know that going out to sea is a huge risk. Ukraine has changed the rules of naval warfare forever. In the air, Russia doesn't dominate either. 3.5 years after the invasion, it still doesn't control the Ukrainian skies. Its air forces have lost hundreds of planes and helicopters, especially during Ukraine's Spider operation, which destroyed dozens of Russian aircraft at their own bases. Faced with so many military failures, what does Russia have left? Terror. Massive bombings against cities, hospitals, schools, power grids, missiles and drones targeting civilians. That's the only thing they've intensified. Their war is more against civilians than on the battlefield. All of this, listen closely, Ukraine achieved without any direct military intervention from foreign troops. Also, during the first months, and even today, NATO countries imposed all kinds of restrictions. For example, they didn't send modern tanks, they didn't send planes, and they didn't allow certain weapons to be used against Russian territory. With that limited weaponry and those conditions, Ukraine won in Kyiv, Kharkiv, and Kherson. UATV Noah Harari is crystal clear about this. If Ukraine had received full support since February 2022, it probably would have won the war before the end of 2022, or at the latest in the summer of 2023, before Russia managed to rebuild its army and military industry. And here comes the key quote from Harari's text.
Since Russia failed to dominate the air or the sea, or to break through Ukraine's ground defenses, its strategy now is to attack the will of the Americans and Europeans. By spreading propaganda about the supposed inevitability of a Russian victory, the Russians hope that Americans and Europeans will lose hope, abandon their support for Ukraine, and force it to surrender. Giving into that propaganda would be a catastrophe, not only for Ukraine but also for the NATO countries, who would lose much of their credibility and their best defense against growing Russian threats. Yuval Noah Harari, Israeli historian, in an article for the Financial Times.
Harari also says that in 2025, the weakest link in Ukraine's defense is still the minds of its Western friends. No one knows how the war will evolve in the coming months. There may be more suffering, more destruction, but there is something that's already irreversible. Ukraine has already won in what truly matters. Because the winner of a war is not the one who occupies the most square kilometers. Who destroys more cities? Or who kills more people? The winner of a war is the one who achieves their political objectives. Putin launched this invasion with a very clear and deliberate goal, to show the entire world that, in his view, the Ukrainian nation did not truly exist, that Ukrainians are actually just Russians, and that therefore Ukraine should ultimately disappear as an independent and sovereign state. 3.5 years later, the entire world has witnessed exactly the opposite of what was once expected. Millions of brave Ukrainians, including both soldiers and innocent civilians, have proven with their blood and sacrifice that Ukraine is truly a real nation, proud, resilient, and willing to fight to the very end for its cherished freedom. That Ukrainian identity, strengthened by the memory of this invasion, of the atrocities and of the sacrifices, will fuel Ukrainian patriotism for generations to come. No matter what happens on the front lines, Putin has already lost his main war. He did not manage to erase Ukraine from the map. On the contrary, it made it stronger and more visible than ever. That, my friends, is a victory that no one can take away from Ukraine. Subscribe to our UATV Spanish channel. You can find us on Facebook and YouTube. Friends, Russian propaganda has been shouting for months that Pokrovsk is about to fall, that they already have it surrounded. But on November 12th, the Ukrainian commander-in-chief, Alexander Syrsky, made it crystal clear.
There is no talk of Russian control over the city of Pokrovsk, nor of any cooperation from the Ukrainian Defense Forces group. The fight continues. Alexander Syrsky, commander-in-chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, reporting on his trip to the Pokrovsk area.
There is no Russian control, nor any cooperation, only constant fighting on the outskirts and in the urban area, with small assault groups taking advantage of the fog to infiltrate, unseen by drones. Syrsky confirmed that Pokrovsk remains the enemy's main focus, but in the last 7 days, Ukraine cleared 7.4 square kilometers of Russian sabotage groups in the area. They protect supply routes, evacuate the wounded, and thwart every attempt at an advance. Western media say that Russia is a year behind its plan to take the city, throwing more cannon fodder into the ruins. This is Russia's great progress. Wasted lives and plenty of lies. Pokrovsk is holding out. Ukraine is holding out, and the propaganda is falling apart. Let's not fall into their trap. Friends, to wrap up, everything I've told you is no coincidence. Russia is not only failing on the battlefield, but it is also clearly losing the ongoing image war. Just take a look at how the well-known propagandist Solovyov completely loses his composure over the repeated Russian defeats, and then delivers his typical, familiar Russian message to his audience.
Ukraine must be destroyed on the other side of the Dnipro. The Kyiv water dam must be destroyed. The city must be flooded. Kharkov must be destroyed. Mykolaiv, Odessa, and Sumy must be wiped off the face of the earth, just like Dnipropetrovsk and other cities. And that's something that first I warn about, people don't understand, and then it gets carried out. Well, unfortunately, there's no other way. This isn't good or bad, it's just facts. Well, how else can we fight? Well, only this way. Only this way.
That's why the strategy changed. Now it directly targets the will of the West. They keep spreading the message that they're the second strongest army in the world, that their victory is inevitable, that Ukraine is on the verge of collapse, but the facts don't match up. It's clear, after 3.5 long, grueling years of war, with exorbitant and staggering casualties, with thousands upon thousands of attacks and countless destroyed planes, Russia controls even less Ukrainian territory than, as we said back in August 2022, and they haven't managed to take any major strategic city since that time. That so-called second army in the world is just smoke and mirrors, a propaganda curtain to scare us, divide us. And to reinforce it, they mix lies with real actions. Russian drones flying over airports in Germany, Denmark, Poland, Belgium, spying on weapons routes, closing airspace, spreading panic, sabotage in warehouses, suspicious fires. It's a hybrid war designed to make the world think it's better not to keep helping Ukraine. What if it ends up happening to us? And what happens then? Some European leaders are starting to repeat the Russian script, sometimes without realizing it, and sometimes fully aware of what they're doing. Take these recent examples from November 2025. The president of the Spanish government, Pedro Sanchez, spoke out against the total militarization of Europe proposed by Trump. Sanchez proposes to act diplomatically, so that by 2035, we don't have a Europe armed to the teeth, but a united Europe that guarantees international law. And the Slovak Prime Minister, Robert Fico, firmly and publicly expressed his opposition to using frozen Russian assets to support Ukraine. According to Bloomer, he said,
Do we want to end the war, or are we fueling it? We're going to give Ukraine 140 billion euros so the war can go on. What does that mean? that the war will last at least 2 more years. Robert Fico, Prime Minister of Slovakia.
Fico says he does not want to prolong the war. However, that is exactly what Putin wants to happen. He wants Europe to get tired, to eventually stop sending weapons, and to force Ukraine to surrender on Moscow's terms. It is certainly no coincidence. Russia knows it can't win on the front lines, so it puts pressure where it hurts most. On our democracies, on our doubts, on the fear of an escalation that they themselves provoke. Falling into that trap would be the mistake. The biggest historical mistake, as Yuval Noah Harari warned, the weakest link in Ukraine's defense is still and remains in the minds of its Western friends. Let's not allow propaganda, drones, spies, and manipulations to make us forget reality. Ukraine is winning the war that truly matters most. And if Europe stands firm and united, Ukraine will not only continue to resist, it will ultimately win. Because giving into fear doesn't bring peace at all. It brings more aggressors, more blackmail, and more wars tomorrow. Stay tuned to UATV Español for even more geopolitics, absolutely without filters or distortions. Please let me know right now in the comment section below which country you're writing to us from. I'm Darina Chichenko. See you again next time, soon. Dear community, I couldn't leave without showing you Russian technological prowess, a drunk Russian robot during a tech presentation in Moscow. And this robot tried to show off its artificial intelligence, but ended up demonstrating the force of gravity. It staggered onto the stage to the heroic Rocky theme and crashed spectacularly before even making its first exit. The audience burst out laughing while the organizers, on the verge of a knockout, tried to cover the technological corpse with a black curtain. Yeah, that went really badly. The video went viral, and many people remembered that legendary Russian robot from 2018 that turned out to be an actor in a costume. It seems that, once again, artificial intelligence lost to natural comedy. I'll leave you with that. Glory to Ukraine!